Hello, everyone. We're about to get started today. I'm Shea, and we're going to talk about houseplants and wellness. Before we begin with the presentation, I'm just going to ask that everyone stays muted for the entirety of the presentation, just so I'm able to hear myself get through everything. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can feel free to enter your questions into the bottom right-hand corner into the text box. We're going to try and get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. So if there's something that you want clarification on, just put it in that box at the bottom right-hand corner, and we can hopefully address it right at the end. Okay, so today we're talking about houseplants and wellness. Normally, when people are requesting for workshops, one of the most requested seminars people want is on the air purifiers, is on the houseplants that do the most to purify the air in our homes. And so that's what we're going to start by talking about. But I also feel like it's really helpful to understand the broader scope of all the ways that houseplants can actually improve your mental and emotional well-being. And so after we talk about the NASA study, I'm going to talk about a number of Okay, I got muted for a second. After we talk about the NASA study, we're going to talk about a couple other studies that really show the myriad of benefits that houseplants can actually provide us. Okay, so let's get started. So this NASA study that showed the most useful plants at purifying the air was conducted in 1989. They were looking for a way not only to produce oxygen on the space station for their astronauts, but also purify and detoxify the air in the space station. Now, why did they want to do this? It was actually sparked by something called sick building syndrome, which first was studied in the 1970s. And what was happening was buildings were being produced in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that were made airtight. People developing these buildings wanted to save money on air conditioning and heating. And so they made the buildings completely airtight. So there was very little air exchange. And what businesses started noticing was their employees in certain buildings were getting sick at extremely high rates, much higher than you would expect normally. And so people did some research and actually found out that it was the buildings themselves that were making people sick. Why was this happening? Our human industry produces a bunch of things: our plastic, our adhesives, our inks, our cosmetics, detergents, pesticides, electrical equipment, all of these things that humans make to some degree off-gas certain chemicals. We call these chemicals volatile organic compounds. Volatile because they're actual compounds that travel through the air and enter into our nose, enter into our bodies. In small degrees, these compounds don't harm us. We're all breathing these in. We're all inhaling these all the time going through life. And for the vast majority of us, it's not a big deal. But when you have chronic exposure to high levels of these volatile organic compounds, it can make you sick. Some common examples of ones that you've probably heard of are formaldehyde, benzene, ammonia, all of these compounds that you've heard of that you're like, yeah, those aren't really healthy. Those are just part of the air, part of what we produce as humans. And again, small degrees, small amounts of them are not a big deal. It's when you're exposed chronically to high levels of these chemicals that you can actually get, they can cause immunosuppressed illnesses, they can increase asthma, it can even in extreme cases cause things like kidney failure or have a causal effect with cancer. And so they're ultimately not good, and you don't want to be exposed to really high amounts of these. So NASA performed this study because they wanted to make sure that their astronauts were going into a space station that was safe and was healthy and was going to be regenerating healthy air for them to be breathing. And they found there's actually a number of plants that are extremely efficient at removing these volatile organic compounds, as well as all plants' ability to take unbreathable carbon dioxide out of the air and replace it with very breathable oxygen. So the formal suggestion that this study, one of the main takeaways of the study is that I'm going to read the list of plants in a minute, but to get the benefit from these plants, you really want to have at least one 6-inch plant So this is a 6-inch plant. The diameter of the pot is 6 inches. 1 6-inch plant per 100 square feet of house. So putting one little tiny succulent isn't really going to do anything for the air, but 1 6-inch plant per 100 square feet will actually do quite a bit at removing these unnecessary compounds and replacing them with fresh, clean oxygen. So I'm going to list the most effective plants that NASA found at removing chemicals from the air. I'm going to read them pretty slowly. At the end of the presentation, I'm frozen.
I don't know. Everybody looks.
Am I frozen? Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you can see me? You guys can see me. It's working. We're having some technical difficulties here at the nursery, so I just want to make sure that everyone's here. Okay, we're going to keep going. So at the end of the presentation, I'll actually go through the particular care of all of these plants, just so you know how to take care of all of these guys. But right now, I'm just going to list them for you. Okay. Peace lily, English ivy, snake plant, dracaena, bamboo palm and areca palm, pothos, anthurium, Gerber daisy, aloe, and Boston fern. So again, these are not the only plants that purify the air, but they are, according to this NASA study, some of the most effective. Now, NASA didn't study all the plants that there are, so they probably likely didn't include in this study certain houseplants that weren't popular back in the 70s. So I'm sure this list, if they replicated this study, would be much longer. The main takeaway that you should derive from this is that leaf surface area is what is correlated with how well plants are able to remove these volatile organic compounds. They're that bigger and the healthier the plant is, the more formaldehyde, benzene, and ammonia it's able to remove from the environment. So dying plants, even if you have a plant that's from this list, a dying plant is not going to be as effective as a healthy plant. The bigger the plant, the better. Okay. The main criticism, and I got muted again. All right, we're back. The main criticism of this study, because it's from 1989 and a lot of people have had certain issues with it. The main criticism is that it hasn't been replicated. The other criticism is that sealed laboratory environments, which is where this study took place, are very different from our unsealed residential homes where we're opening windows and opening doors and there's a lot of air exchange going on. I don't find this criticism to be that compelling because it is in the winter when our doors are closed, our windows are closed, the ambient humidity plummets because all of the available moisture in the air gets frozen into the ground. Our forced hot air and our radiators and our fireplaces all kick on, and that it further reduces humidity in our home. So it's in the winter that our houses actually resemble those sealed laboratory environments the most. And that's actually when we want to get the most benefit from these plants. And while this study exactly hasn't been replicated in perfect form, more recent studies have shown that it's not just the leaves of the plants that are able to perform what's called phytoremediation. Phyto is the Greek word for plant. So phytoremediation is what scientists call plants' ability to actually remove chemical compounds from the air. So it's not just leaves that can do that. It's actually also the roots of the plant perform phytoremediation, as well as the microorganisms living in the soil. So most people are aware that there are microorganisms outside in our native soils. There's mycorrhizae fungi, and there's bacteria, and there's insects, and there's small organisms that help promote the ecology and the diversity of that soil. But that's true even in a lot of our houseplants. Even in our potting soils, there are microscopic organisms that you can't see that are actually helping the plant remove. They're helping the plant live by exchanging nutrients, but they're also helping the plant remove these volatile organic compounds from the air. Now, how do plants do this? So plants, as everyone knows, plants take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen. So how does this work exactly? So we have a dracaena here. We're gonna talk about how this works. So plants on the undersides of their leaves have things called stomates. Stomates are the pores of a plant that allow gas exchange and water exchange. So a plant, through these stomates on the underside of their leaves, take in carbon dioxide, and they take in these volatile organic compounds. And then they use photosynthesis from absorbed light on the top side of the leaves where all the chlorophyll is. And they exchange that, they perform chemical process, and they release fresh breathable oxygen and water vapor from the underside of these leaves. So again, that can give you a better understanding of how a healthier plant is able to do more phytoremediation. The more leaves there are in that plant, the more of those volatile organic compounds it's able to intake and replace with fresh oxygen and clean water vapor. Okay, so basically the bottom line of this study and other studies that have shown similar results is that plants do a lot to clean the air. It's not the case that it's just the huge 200-year-old oak trees outside that are performing air cleaning and producing oxygen for us. It can be our very own houseplants that we keep in our homes. But it's not just cleaning the air that plants are able to do. Plants also increase humidity. So as I was saying earlier, it's winter in New England, our forced hot air turns on, our fireplaces are roaring, all of our windows and doors are closed. And again, that ambient humidity, normally in the summer, you see humidity at 60%, 70%, maybe even 90%. In the winter, all that moisture gets frozen into the ground, and humidity at my house in the winter, humidity is like between 10 and 20%. So it can be really low. If you're like me, winter is when you get sick. It's when your immune system is compromised. You might have sinus issues. My husband has horrible allergies in the winter, and his asthma can be really bad in the winter. And that's because this terrible air exchange and the humidity being so low, it actually puts pressure on our body. Our body doesn't do well when the humidity is that low. So plants, as I explained, they're releasing the fresh air, and they're also releasing water vapor. So a plant is able to actually create humidity, promote humidity in a certain area. Plants I see as almost like mini little humidifiers. One study I read found that a collection of spider plants in a room increased humidity from 20% all the way to 30%. Now, this may not seem like a big difference, but that's actually quite a big difference when you think about it. Just a few spider plants are able to bring that humidity from 20%, which feels really, really dry, to 30%, which feels that much less dry. That's a really big impact. So houseplants are actually able to make you healthier by just promoting humidity around them. Working in the greenhouse, I work at the greenhouse in Hopkinton. I have found I used to get sick. I used to get a cold every single winter. Many people do. Our immune systems are compromised because of the stress on our system. Since working at Weston Nurseries, I don't get sick in the winter anymore. I am in a humid greenhouse where it's sunny and warm, and humidity is normally like between 60 and 90%. And I find I don't get colds anymore in the winter. So that is just an example. There's just anecdotal evidence from my life that shows that humidity that the plants create can actually really have a positive impact on your health. Now, there's more to the benefits of houseplants than just removing these compounds, purifying the air, promoting humidity. There's actually a whole slew of scientific studies that are coming out more every year that show that houseplants do more for us than just create a better environment for us to live in. They can actually have a really direct positive impact on our emotional well-being as well as our physical health. So I'm going to just run through a couple of studies just to give you guys a sampling of all the benefits that houseplants can give you. I'm not going to cite any of these, but you can look all of these up. They're all peer-reviewed. They're all legitimate, valid studies. This is kind of just to give you a sense of the breadth of the positive impact that a houseplant can have. Okay, so first one I read, they performed a study and found that in offices with plants, the employees took fewer sick days. So again, that's really directly related to the first study, the NASA study that I talked about, that sick building syndrome. With their plants purifying the air, people are going to take fewer sick days. People are actually going to be healthier. Another study I read found that in hospital rooms that had a really nice view of the outside or had potted plants in them, the patients in those rooms needed fewer medications, they healed faster, and they tolerated pain better than those in rooms without plants and without a view. There is a Norwegian study I read that had people broke up into two groups. One group performed a computer task, and then they repotted a houseplant. The next group repotted a houseplant, and then they performed a computer task. It was something using simple math and just typing things on a computer. It wasn't a challenging task, but you did have to use a computer. And they found that the people that repotted the houseplant before performing the computer task did better on the computer task. They also were calmer and happier during the second task when they had to perform the computer task. So how do you quantify calmness and happiness? They measured their cortisol levels. So cortisol is the stress hormone, that was lower, and they measured their blood pressure. So that was also lower. So truly, the people who repotted the houseplant first, they were happier and more comfortable and just better off than those who had done it second. So really positive impact for those people. The next study, I love this study. I think this was performed in Norway, and this was a very big study. So it was a double blind. There were thousands of participants, and what they did, the scientists had a number of patients see the same doctor every single week over the course of 6 months. Half those patients waited for the doctor in a waiting room that had no houseplants. The other patients waited for the doctor in a waiting room that had a few houseplants. That was a big enough difference for at the end of the study, when they took everyone's self-reported health and wellness, they did a health and wellness questionnaire. Those who were just waited for a doctor, these groups saw the same exact doctor. Those who waited for the doctor in a room that had houseplants cited themselves as being happier and healthier than those that waited in the waiting room without houseplants. Now, these people were not aware that they were being studied for the houseplants. They had no idea that the houseplants were even part of the study. So I love this study because it really shows that it takes very, very little. Just waiting in a waiting room with houseplants is enough to have a positive impact on your health and your happiness. The last study I read, which is also extremely interesting, found that students in a classroom that contained 3 potted plants perform better on math, science, reading, and social studies tests. So this is more than just physical well-being and emotional well-being. This shows that houseplants can actually improve your ability, you can enhance your focus, really. It can improve your ability to perform on certain intellectual tasks. Again, really just so interesting. It has huge implications. If you really think about that, there's huge implications for our education system and how our schools work and how classes work. I mean, growing up in my schools, very rarely were there plants in the classrooms. And reading this study makes you be like, wow, that should be part of the curriculum, really, at the, or at the very least, there should be plants in every single room in every single school. So I hope you guys found those studies interesting. Again, you can look up all of those online, or if you have more questions, you can ask me at the end of the presentation. But all I'm trying to do is just express how science is ultimately coming forward with a deeper understanding of how important plants are. Scientists are realizing that they can actually have hugely beneficial impacts to our lives. Gardening is now used medically as a therapy for schizophrenia, PTSD, anxiety, depression, and so many more mental illnesses. So doctors are starting to figure out, they're starting to realize, oh my gosh, okay, working with plants is actually potentially as effective as certain pharmaceutical medications. We should really be exploring this more. So a lot of times people, when I explain this to them, they're like, all right, well, how can I really apply this? Well, just put plants in my house and I'm just getting a benefit. And what I want to express to everyone is really how you can maximize these benefits. And what that means, how you can do that is by not just treating houseplants as decor. All the time, people come into the greenhouse and they're like, oh, I have this dingy spot in my house. I really want something beautiful. Oh, this is a beautiful plant. I want it. Okay, I'm going to take it. Without really looking at the plant, trying to find a plant that speaks to them, or trying to find a plant that's going to really thrive in that area. So what I guess I want to express to everyone is that you're going to get the most benefits from your plants if you actively care for them. If you look at them every single day, learn what they really want, take time each week, checking them for water, misting them. I love to move my houseplants around. I always feel like you get used to them in a certain spot and then you put them somewhere new and they look fabulous all of a sudden. Some houseplants don't tolerate it, but some love it. And all these ways just get you connected with the plants. Now, some of those studies show that you don't need to be connected to the plants. You don't even need to be aware of the plants in order to derive benefit from them, but you're going to derive the most benefit from them if you're actually spending time with them and caring for them. I always tell people that houseplants are like pets. They need TLC. They need to be paid attention to. They need water and food, just like a dog or a cat, maybe just not as often. And so really in like connecting with them is how you're going to benefit the most from them. I also think an important caveat to remember is that a dying plant, you're not going to derive any benefit from. Not only is it not going to be removing those volatile organic compounds from the air, a dying plant is not going to be promoting that much humidity. But if you go and you buy a bunch of plants because you want the benefit from them and then all of them die because it's unrealistic for you to take care of that many, then you're actually going to associate that with a negative feeling, and you're going to drive more of a negative impact from them than you would if you are really conscious about purchasing plants within your abilities, starting with the low maintenance plants first, and then kind of increasing your selection from there. Now, I do like to remind people, I feel that before you can learn to keep a lot of houseplants alive, you're going to have to kill some. So I never want people to feel bad when they kill houseplants. I tell people I've killed one of everything, and that's how I've kept them. That's how I've learned to keep them alive. That's how you learn. You have to fail. But ultimately, I have a limit on how many houseplants I can bring into my house, because at a certain point, you can't take care of everything because they do need care. And so all I want everyone to know is that to get houseplants, get beautiful houseplants, get the ones that speak to you, make sure that they're going to be in a spot that they can actually thrive, and make sure that you're actually paying attention to them. And that's how you're going to get the most benefit from them. Okay, so now before we go through questions, I'm just going to talk about the specific care needs of some of the houseplants that were from that NASA study. Fortunately, and I think relatedly to why they're so effective at purifying the air, is because they are some of the easiest houseplants to take care of. So it makes sense. If leaf surface area determines how well a plant is able to perform phytoremediation, then the easiest plants are going to grow with the least care and the least water and the least attention. And so those are going to be the best at purifying. So let's go down the list. The first we have is peace lily. So normally you'll see this with beautiful white flowers. It's got like a thick spadix and a beautiful white sheath around the spadix. Peace lilies are a really classic plant. Some people call them vintage. They've been popular for a really long time, and they're fairly low maintenance. They're a great option if you are looking for a plant that is going to be in low light. They really do prefer low light to high light. They don't want any direct sunlight whatsoever. They tend to wilt when they need to be watered. So I typically, for many of my plants, I like to wait until they wilt before I water them. If you catch them on the first day of wilting, then you're actually ensuring that you're not going to be overwatering the plant. Peace lilies hate to be overwatered. They also hate to be repotted. So a lot of people buy peace lily and they immediately repot it, and then it dies and they wonder why. It's because they repotted it. They want to be pot bound. They want those roots encircling the bottom of their pot. And when they are potted, they really only want to go a half size up with the exact right soil mix for them. So typically you can get the right soil mix by just mimicking whatever the mix is that they're in when you buy them. So that's a peace lily right there. Okay, and this is English ivy. This is a variegated ivy. Most people are familiar with ivy. I consider this a more intermediate houseplant in terms of challenge. They require more sun than many people often recognize. They don't want low light. I keep mine almost in full morning sun, so it gets many hours of direct sunlight in the morning. They'd rather have bright light rather than low light, and they are prone to pests. So if you let this plant dry out, or it's in really, really, really low humidity for an extended period of time, you're more likely to stress the plant out and attract certain pests. So almost every ivy I've had has gotten spider mites. That's very normal. Scale and mealybugs are also common on English ivy. So the key is don't let them dry out. keep them humidity high, and keep them in bright light. Snake plant. Snake plants are a gift to us. Snake plants are so easy. You can't kill a snake plant. They like anywhere from bright light, bright direct sunlight in a southern facing window, all the way down to low light. Now, if you put them in low light, you don't expect them to grow very much. They're not gonna thrive. They're not gonna produce lots of new foliage, but they will survive. So if you get a nice full plant and you're not looking for it to grow much, stick it in a nice low light spot and it'll just do great. It'll just live there, purifying the air for almost no work. The real benefit of the snake plant is that they need almost no water. So the size of the pot that it's in is going to determine how often a plant needs water. Smaller pots dry out much faster than larger pots. But again, you really want to wait until the soil is bone dry. You almost treat it like a cactus. My snake plants that I have in big 10-inch pots, so they're the floor plants, they're 3 feet tall. I water them in the winter once every 2 months, maybe once every 3 months. I really wait for it to dry out, and then I give it a good drink in the sink till I see the water drain. In a 4-inch pot like this, I could probably get away going once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks. In the summer, if it's actively growing, you're going to water more. I also keep my snake plants in low light. If I kept them in much brighter light, they would need slightly more water. The key is always use your finger. It's your little moisture meter. Stick it in the soil and see how dry it feels. If there's any moisture in there at all, do not water your snake plants. Okay, and then we have Dracaena. Now, there are many varieties of Dracaena. You may have Dracaena in your house and not even be aware of it. They may look different than these guys, but here are 2 examples. We've got a Janet Craig, just classic green foliage, really straightforward. You can see how leaf surface area, if that affects rate of purification, look how many leaves, look how much surface area is on this plant. This plant is going to be hugely capable of phytoremediation. This is another example. This is a Warneckii, beautiful variegation on this one. You'll also see other Dracaenas known as dragon tree. They have really narrow foliage. Sometimes they have a red margin or even a pink margin. That's another variety of Dracaena. Dracaenas, again, super easy houseplants. They thrive with almost complete neglect. They do well in low light. They'll take a little bit of sun, but they really don't want direct sunlight on their foliage at all. The key with the Dracaenas to remember is the more you water them, the more they will grow. So they'll live by being underwatered. They don't show that much damage, but they do need a lot of water to grow. If you do give them a lot of water, they will thrive and they will grow like a foot every year. They'll just take over. I love Dracaenas. It's a really good option for people who want something that's going to ultimately have like a tree form. A lot of times people come into the greenhouse looking for a fiddle leaf fig, but then through some questioning, they realize they don't really have a good spot for a fiddle leaf fig, or they don't really have the patience to give the fiddle leaf fig all the care that it wants. I always recommend a Dracaena for people in that situation. Okay, the next one is a pothos. Now, most people who have houseplants have interacted with pothos. This is like the go-to easy, low maintenance hanging plant that cascades really beautifully. This plant is incredibly easy to propagate. You buy one plant, you'll have a million plants within a few years. Medium, low light. It'll take a little morning sun, but it really would prefer to be out of direct sunlight at all. They'll grow the best when they're in bright, indirect light. And again, they cascade. So you see them they do really well on cabinets or hanging in hanging pots, or even I put mine like on bookshelves to cascade down. They do really well. They're not very prone to pests. They're very tolerant of underwatering. My pothos, I don't water until they're like screaming for water. They're so wilted and they're like, oh my gosh. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I'll give you a drink, no problem. They really don't want to be overwatered. And again, they're really easy to propagate. So it can be a fun thing to do to kind of increase your stock and your selection of houseplants. Okay, Anthurium. This is also called, I think they call it lace leaf flower. They also call it flamingo flower. So you can see similar to a peace lily, but in different colors. There's that thick spadix. This is a flower. This right here is the flower. It's actually not, this isn't a petal. It's a bract. It's a modified leaf that's meant to protect the flower. These are, again, really beautiful houseplants. They're a little bit more challenging than some of the other ones. They require bright indirect light. They will not do well in low light, and they will not do well in any direct sunlight. So people looking for a low maintenance houseplant, if they've never taken care of a houseplant like this, I always tell them, be really conscious of how much light you're putting in there. You're looking for that ambient blue light. You're looking for the light that comes into a north facing window. It's not direct penetrative sun rays, but it's just a nice, soft, glowy light. That's what these guys thrive in. They like their soil to be evenly moist all the time. So unlike the snake plant and your succulents and even like your pothos, you want to keep the soil lightly moist. You never want to let it get completely dry, but then you also have to be careful not to overwater it. So if the soil's pretty wet, don't water it. If the soil's just lightly wet, give it a little drink. They are sensitive to low humidity. So if you put it right on a mantelpiece or right near a radiator, it's not going to thrive. It really does need to have a promoted humidity around it. But hopefully what you've learned from this presentation is that putting other plants near plants that require high humidity actually can help those plants thrive. So a lot of times I'll put like a really finicky plant, like a fern that needs high humidity or a begonia, I'll put it just near other plants that are promoting the humidity around it. And then I don't need to worry about misting it daily or putting a humidifier around it. Okay. And we have an aloe here. Aloes are great, wonderful succulent, really easy. Like all other cacti and succulent, water them when they're bone dry, give them bright, full sun, lots of light, as much light as you can give them, and they'll just take off for you. The benefit of aloes is that you can actually cut off their foliage. If you have a sunburn or if you have a rash or something, aloe, that the juice from the aloe vera, it's the same thing that you buy, at CVS when you get a sunburn, but it actually is 10 times more potent when you get it directly from the plant. So I am the queen of my aloe is really big, and I'll cut the lower foliage in the summer and use it as aloe, and then I don't buy aloe anymore. And it actually works so well. It's so cooling and it's so good for your skin. So it's just another benefit that you can derive from this plant. I don't have the other examples, but one of the other ones was a Boston fern. Boston ferns are hugely successful at purifying the air, but they are a little bit more challenging. So a lot of times people will treat them as an annual. They'll buy them for a nice shady porch or a nice shady patio, and it's just lush green foliage. It looks beautiful. Then they bring it inside their homes, and the Boston ferns almost always suffer. That's because they're going from amazing conditions, exactly what they want outside, high humidity, bright indirect light. They want the shade, but shade outside is bright indirect light in our homes. And then they want the high humidity. So a lot of times people bring them inside, they put them in a dark corner, they put them near a fireplace, and then they get brown and crispy and they lose other leaves, and then they're watering. The issue is not the water. They don't want to be let to be dry out, but ultimately how you can get your Boston fern to survive in the winter is to give it bright light and to put a humidifier right near it. It really needs that humidity cranking in order for it to succeed. Typically, I tell people, don't expect your Boston ivy to thrive throughout the winter. Keep it alive, throw it outside in May, and it'll just take off and it'll grow tons of new foliage for you, and it'll be beautiful. The last one, and then it's another one, we actually aren't carrying it right now in the greenhouse, but the Gerber daisy. Gerber daisies have been found to be highly effective at removing, in particular, formaldehyde from the air. Gerber daisies, you typically only see them in the summer as an annual, but they actually do quite well as a house plant, but you're not going to get them to flower for you all year long. Typically with plants that do really well as house plants that are often marketed as annuals, you'll see hibiscus treated as a house plant all the time. Plants that flower don't want to flower in the winter. If they're going to do all right in your home, you don't want to be pushing so much growth out of them. It's a lot of energy that it requires for a plant to actually produce flowers. And typically these plants, the Gerber daisy in particular, you want to go dormant for the winter. Still performing all of those phytoremediation that it's performing whether or not it has flowers. The flowers aren't really doing much for that. It's really the foliage of the plant. But it does actually make a great house plant. You just can't expect many flowers. The Gerber daisy needs full sun. So it needs a bright, sunny, southern facing or western facing windowsill in order for it to thrive. And again, it doesn't like to dry out. So you want to keep it lightly moist. You never want it to be soggy. So it's kind of like the anthurium, with the exception that it wants much more sun than the anthurium, but you've got to kind of figure out the exact right way that you can keep it watered without it being overwatered. Okay, so those are all the plants that I've listed for the phytoremediation that perform the best at removing volatile organic compounds from the air. There are certainly more plants that do that. Crispy wave is an example. Crispy wave fern, also called bird's nest fern, is another example that recent studies have come out saying that it's actually highly effective. So by no means limit yourself to the plants on this list. These are just some examples of some plants that are particularly good at phytoremediation and are particularly easy to take care of. So I hope that you guys found this useful. Again, as always, if anyone has any questions about any of this stuff, you can send me an email. My email address is Sheam, SHEAM, @westonnurseries.com. I'm only here on Sunday, so if you emailed me last week, I'll get back to you this afternoon. So if you're willing to wait a couple days for a response, I'm happy to clarify any questions for you. But right now, I think we'll go through and answer some questions that people asked during the presentation. Melissa, do we have any questions?
We sure do.
Okay, let's get started.
Somebody wants a suggestion for splitting a peace lily. Just remind them to put the questions in the chat box in the bottom right.
Okay.
Has already been.
Okay, so if you have questions, the text box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Someone is asking on how to split a peace lily. My recommendation is, unless you're a professional, don't split it. You're probably going to kill it. Even just repotting these plants, just taking this out of this 4-inch pot and sticking it in a bigger pot is going to stress the plant out and it might die. So my suggestion is don't do it. If you are deeply attached to the plant, if it has sentimental value, don't even bother. If you want to experiment and you're willing to take on a little risk, then you're going to want to make sure the plant's really well watered a couple days beforehand. So you don't want to be soggy wet when you're dividing it, but you want to make sure that it's not going to be stressed from being underwatered. And you don't want to water it right before you divide it, because that's not giving the plant any time to take in that water. So make sure it's had plenty of water. And then it's a question of teasing the roots apart. Now, you want to be careful with the roots of a peace lily. They're very sensitive, and that's ultimately why they die when they get repotted. So you don't want to, it's not like, dividing peonies outside where you just you dig your peonies up, you take that shovel and you just cut right down the center. You're going to want to be a little bit more like a surgeon and kind of tease the plants apart. Very often, when you purchase houseplants at a greenhouse, they're sticking multiple plants in one pot. And so it's really two separate plants that have grown with their roots intertwined. So it's just going to be a question of kind of teasing those roots apart. You can cut them to some degree, but the more you cut them, the more you're going to stress the plant out. And then you want to make sure that you're repotting those divided plants into small pots. You don't want to take a 4-inch pot. If I were to take this and divide it into 2 plants, I would place those plants back into, this is a 4-inch pot, I would probably put them into each 3-inch pots. I would probably put them into smaller pots than they were before, unless this was so absolutely pot bound that one of those could go right back in here. But I certainly wouldn't divide this and then put each of them in a 6-inch pot. That's one of the main mistakes that people make when they're repotting houseplants. They want the plants to grow, and so they just put them in huge pots with tons of wet soil, and very rarely do plants like that. Monstera is one of the only ones that I can think of that really tolerates going into a much bigger pot than it started in. Okay, next question.
The next question. Hold on a second, it just popped out. Oh, so this is interesting. I inherited a large aloe plant that's growing really tall, but it's falling over. Should I use a stake to support it? I have it balanced against the wall to hold it up, but some of the leaves are splitting under their own weight. Mm-hmm. Tips for dividing it as well.
Okay, so we have another division question. This one is in particular about aloe. So this person is talking about their aloe plant, which is getting so tall that it's actually falling over. That is totally normal. My aloe, I had resting against a wall for probably 2 years before I had knocked it over so many times that I was like, okay, I got to repot this plant and stake it because this is just too much. So it is their habit to grow. They grow from the apex. So they grow from the top. So as this guy grows, it's going to get taller and taller and taller. And these thick fleshy leaves are actually quite heavy. That coupled with the fact that you're aiming for the soil to be quite dry can lead to a situation in which your plant's really top heavy and it's toppling over. So staking is absolutely an option. I also tell people, and this is what I did for mine, as plants grow, they're going to lose lower foliage. That's very normal. Unless you have perfect conditions and you never forget a plant, you're going to lose a lot of that lower foliage as it grows. So with an aloe plant, what will happen is they'll grow taller and then they lose that bottom foliage. And then there's like an exposed stalk that's kind of leaning over, and then the foliage is above that. You can repot that plant deeper. Succulents are really easy to root. They'll root from almost any part of the plant. And so you're not going to rot that aloe the way you would a peace lily or like a snake plant. If you planted it way too deep, you're actually going to just promote roots to grow along that stalk where there was once leaves. So I would say either repot it a little bit deeper, or you can stake it. You want to find a place where the stake can rest so it's not actually splitting that foliage and causing more damage. But it's absolutely possible to just plant it a little bit deeper. And then I also find that planting an aloe plant in a terracotta pot works much better than a plastic pot. Terracotta pots promote better drainage. That baked clay is porous, so it wicks moisture out of the soil. So it's a really good option for people who tend to overwater their plants. It's much harder to overwater when it's in a terracotta pot. Also, terracotta is much heavier than plastic. So you'll simultaneously be able to water more and keep that soil heavier. And then it's also just a heavier pot. So it's much less likely to be toppling over, and it'll support the stake much better than a plastic pot. Okay, next question.
We did the peace lily one, right?
Yes.
Okay, the next one is, what about a monstera plant? I'm pretty sure you went over it, but.
Okay, so someone is asking about a monstera plant. So if you're asking about whether or not they purify the air, the answer is they absolutely do. All plants purify the air. All plants are able to take in carbon dioxide and volatile organic compounds and release fresh oxygen and clean water vapor. The bigger the monstera, the better. Now, this study didn't study monsteras. It was not on the list. And so I don't know how effective at removing the particular compounds it is, but it absolutely will purify the air for you. Those huge fenestrated leaves, there's a lot of surface area there. Also, monsteras, I found in my experience, are pretty easy. They grow with not a lot of care, and they grow big and they grow fast and they grow tall, and then you need a stake before you know it. And so they're absolutely going to be a good option for you if you're looking for something that's going to purify the air. In terms of care for a monstera, you want to give it bright light and you want to keep it decently well watered. So I have a monstera that is in a southeast facing window, so it gets some morning sun, but it doesn't really get sun afternoon. If you gave it too much sun in the afternoon, especially in the summer, it's going to get sunburned. And it's in a nice big pot. It is one of the only plants that really tolerates being up potted into a much bigger size. You actually find that if you were to take a little monstera plant and put it in a nice big pot, those leaves are going to be much more fenestrated. They're going to look much more adult. The fenestration in the leaves is the holes in the leaves that make it look like Swiss cheese, or even like the little fingers, the lobes on the side. An immature monstera plant, if you were to buy one in a 4-inch pot, the leaves would just look like heart-shaped philodendron leaves. They look totally normal. There's no fenestration, no holes, no lobes, nothing. But as that plant matures, more and more fenestrations develop. I think scientists found that it was the fenestrations developed as a result of not wanting water to settle on the leaves, and it allows water to pass right through without breaking the leaves or without being a home to pathogens and fungus and stuff. You don't want water sitting on a leaf like that. So that's why that plant adapted and developed those holes so it could support those huge leaves without lots of breakage. And if you'll find if you were to take a 4-inch monstera, So I wouldn't recommend this for other plants, but Monstera, you can do it. You're take a 4-inch size. So this is an ivy, so don't pay attention to this, but this size pot and put it in like a 6 or an 8-inch pot, even bigger than this. The new foliage that emerges is going to be much larger and much more fenestrated. So Monstera, I think, is an awesome plant to kind of learn how plants can mature and how immature leaves can look really different than mature leaves. And it's so satisfying when you repot a Monstera and they're dinky, tiny little leaves on it. And then all of a sudden it produces a new leaf and you see it unfurl and it's a 1.5 foot across and it's got tons of fenestration. Monsteras are just so fun for that. So it's definitely a plant that I recommend, although it's not formally on the NASA purification list. Okay, any more questions?
Tons. Yes. What about leafy vegetables? I grow spinach and lettuce indoors for the winter. Should I be concerned about eating those elements?
Oh, someone's asking about leafy vegetables. That is, so if you're growing spinach or kale or anything else that does really well in cold temperatures that you can grow under lights in your home, those are absolutely going to be promoting humidity and performing phytoremediation. Those are absolutely going to be removing volatile organic compounds from the air. Again, they weren't studied, but they've absolutely will do that. Now, I wouldn't say, you ask if you should be worried about removing that benefit by eating them. I think ultimately you're going to get more of a benefit from eating those leafy greens, all those vitamins and those nutrients. The iron in spinach alone is enough to justify eating it. So keep eating that spinach, keep growing it. But if you're not eating it, if let's say you bolt, it bolts and you don't pick it in time and it's not no longer a food source, it's still going to be promoting humidity and phytoremediating the air. So it's still good for you, even if you're not eating it. Okay.
All right, next, any advice for African violets?
African violets. Okay. I love African violets. So African violets are, I wish I had an example, but I don't. They're really, not like old timey flowers, but they've been really popular for a really long time. The younger customers that come into the greenhouse hardly ever want them, which I think is so sad because they're such beautiful little plants and they're so easy. So they're just stout little plants like this. They just grow a little rosette of leaves. They never grow tall like a stalk. They never grow big fronds like a palm, but they absolutely make wonderful little house plants. The key with African violets is bright indirect light. They really don't want low light and they don't want any direct sunlight whatsoever. And they need to be watered from the bottom. So they have really fuzzy foliage. And so if you let water sit on that foliage for whatever reason, it causes the plant to almost change color and it gets like a gross texture on it and it turns white and weird and it looks moldy, even though it's not moldy. They really don't like too much water on the foliage. So you have to water that plant from the bottom. So you place it in a saucer with an inch of water, stick that pot in and it absorbs the water from the bottom. African violets do really well with not a lot of care. So I pulled one when I first started here, when I thought I could save every plant that was getting thrown in the trash. I've since given up on that because that is too many plants. I can't take on that many plants, but I pulled one out of the trash and I brought it home. I water it maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once every 3 weeks, and it flowers for me. So the real benefit of the African violets is that they flower. They've got beautiful little purple, pink, powder blue flowers. It flowers for me 2 or 3 times a year with almost no care. I water it once every 2-3 weeks, maybe twice a month. I'll water it. I've fertilized it 1 time in the last 4 years. I fertilized it 1 single time, and I didn't even use African violet fertilizer. I used just an all-purpose plant food, and it flowers for me without fail 3 times a year. I went to water it this morning before I left my house. I was like, ooh, I haven't watered this African violet in a long time. It's not going to be doing so well. I swear I probably haven't watered it in a month. I go over there and it's producing buds. It's about to flower again for me. And I haven't fertilized it in years. I haven't watered it in at least a month and it's just taken off. I have it in an east facing window and it's just, the baby is just thriving. So African violets are absolutely an awesome plant to take care of. Their air purification abilities, I don't really know. I mean, it wasn't studied, and they do remain quite small. So you're never going to see like a huge, if you buy a African violet in a 6-inch pot, it's really just 3 or 4 plants planted together. It never really gets huge. It's just kind of a little rosette of leaves. But they're absolutely a plant that gives back to you. I couldn't recommend African violets enough for people who like something really easy, low maintenance, and something that's going to flower for them. Okay, next question.
Okay, next question. This is fun. Okay, you ready?
Mhm.
Oh, so this is interesting. It's not really about a question now, but it's an idea for us.
Mhm.
A future workshop on pruning a jade plant.
Oh,
So let's keep that in our heads.
yeah. So
I like that.
someone's talking about pruning jade and how they'd love to see that as a workshop option. Now, next week, I am doing houseplant propagation at 10:30 a.m. next Sunday.
Yeah.
I'm going to go over all the different options for propagating houseplants. And so that pruning a jade, I can include jade in that. So if you're interested in learning about that, I'll teach you how to propagate a jade plant, which you can kind of combine with pruning it, because you can always prune it back and then take those pruned pieces that you cut off and root them and then cut them and then make them into new propagated baby plants. So we can absolutely do that.
Okay, all right, let's see. I've heard that monsteras will produce more fenestrations the more breeze they have.
Oh, that's interesting. So this is just a comment that I will share. Someone's talking about Monstera. So this must have been from when I was discussing the care for Monstera. They have learned that the more breeze the Monstera experiences, the more fenestrated the leaves are going to be. So that makes sense with the theory that it's to allow passage of water through. It's also to allow passage of air through. Those big leaves are less likely to break if there are holes through them for that those windy, rainy storms that they get in those tropical places where they're native to. Okay, any more questions?
Yes, I need to know of the plants that you recommended, is there a particular good one for cats? I have a room that's our main room and I've moved all my plants out of the room because she's worried about her cats.
Okay, so someone is asking about cat-safe air purifiers. So this is a huge question we get into the greenhouse all the time. I actually was going to include a section on cat-safe plants, but I didn't think it was perfectly relevant. But I'm glad that you asked this question. So the vast majority of houseplants that you can purchase are toxic to cats and dogs, along a scale. So most of the ones that you purchase are not deathly toxic. They're not going to kill your animal if they eat a small amount of it. But most of them will make a cat or a dog sick if they ingest a good portion of those leaves. So there are a number of houseplants that are not toxic. One of them is the aloe. So this is not toxic. An animal can eat that. Palms. If you're looking for a floor plant, a palm is the plant. Those plants are totally fine. Cats can consume so much of those, and those are totally fine. And then from the other ones that I've listed, that is it. So aloe plant and palms are the only. Oh, and the Boston fern. Boston fern is all ferns are non-toxic to cats. Be aware if it's a true fern or not. So asparagus fern is often called a fern. We sell them at the nursery with our ferns, but they actually produce flowers and berries. Ferns produce asexually from spores on the undersides of the leaves. So if a plant is producing flowers and berries, it is not a true fern. So asparagus ferns are toxic, but all other ferns, including the Boston fern, including the crispy wave fern, maidenhair fern, lace leaf fern, those are all examples of cat-safe houseplants. Okay, any more questions?
Okay, there, I believe, or just hold on 1 second. We've got quite a few compliments. Somebody asked about posting the recording on Facebook. No, we post it on our website through YouTube. It'll be up within a week or so.
Okay, someone's asking if we're going to post this workshop on Facebook. Unfortunately, we don't post the workshops on Facebook, but we do post them on the website. So within 1 week from today, it will be up on the website.
But I'll let them know on Facebook it is.
Yes, and Melissa, our marketing manager, who's sitting with me right now, she will send out a message on Facebook letting everyone know that it's been posted to the website. So if you wanted to have some clarification, if you wanted to hear the list of plants again, if you wanted to rehear those studies, the information from those studies, so you can look them up for your own knowledge, all that information, you can just watch the lecture again when it's posted on the website within 1 week.
We have one question here, and then there's somebody they put a question in earlier, but when I lost my connection, I lost the question.
Okay.
So I'll ask them after this one. So I have pathos living in soil and some in water. The ones in the water tend to thrive much better. Any suggestions for the ones I have in soil?
Okay, someone is asking a question about pothos, and they're saying they're growing them in water and they're growing them in soil. So pothos is classic cascading plant, also called Chinese money plant, also called devil's ivy. This is one of the few plants that you can actually grow very easily hydroponically. So you can cut stems off and grow them in water. This question is that their pothos in the water is doing much better than their pothos not in the water. That is probably a question of how much water the pothos that's not in the water is getting. Sorry, I'm saying water 1,000 times, tongue twister. If your pothos that's in soil is not thriving, you might be underwatering it, you might be overwatering it, or it might not be in the right light. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that it's in the same lighting conditions as the pothos that's thriving. And then you want to take your finger in the soil, you want to check it. So plants that are grown hydroponically mean that they produce roots that are hydroponic. They produce roots that are able to live in water and extract moisture and nutrients from the water. Most plant roots can't do that. If I were to just submerge this whole thing in water, the roots that this plant has produced are not hydroponic roots. They are soil roots. So they would actually die if I put them in water. They would drown. So you want to make sure that you're not overwatering your pothos. You don't want it to be soggy wet all the time, or it's not going to be happy. It's going to be much happier with much drier soil. The other side of that token is that you want to make sure that you're not letting it get so dry that it's wilting and it's dying for lack of water. So it can be challenging to kind of figure out. And a lot of the times, if the soil is too wet and the plant's being overwatered, the roots are actually rotting and they're not able to take in water. And the symptoms that you're going to see on the plant is going to look identical to underwatering. So underwater plants and overwater plants very often look exactly the same. So again, it's just a question of sticking that finger in the soil and making sure it feels lightly moist, but not soggy wet. You don't want it so sopping wet that if you were to squeeze the ball of soil, lots and lots of water would come out.
Okay. Two things. One, please let everybody know that we have the Gardening 101 class on Facebook.
Okay.
It's called Gardening 101. Group for new gardeners at Weston Nurseries. There's a lot of interesting information in there.
Okay.
And the staff will go in and make answers and they'll let me know when I check.
Okay.
So if people have answers when you're not here.
Okay.
So and then please ask Christine Ahern to repost her question because I lost it one of the times I lost her connection.
Okay. First of all, Christine, you posted a question, but we lost it because we lost our connection here. So if you're still on, Christine, post your question again and we'll answer it. This is a good time for me to let you guys know that we have Gardening 101 Ask the Experts on our Facebook page. So if you have,
it's called Gardening 101, the new group for gardeners at Weston.
Okay, it's actually called Gardening 101, the new group for gardeners at Weston Nurseries. It's a Facebook page. So if you go into it's a Facebook group. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have Facebook, so I am not as knowledgeable. But if you go onto our Facebook, you can join this group and you can post questions to this group, and then professionals and experts at the nursery will be able to answer your question. So check out our Facebook page and you'll see it linked. And it's just a great resource if you're new to gardening, or even if you've been gardening for many years, it's old hat to you. There's still more things that you can learn. So feel free to join that group and you can ask whatever questions you need. Okay.
Okay, did Christine, let's see. Christine, I hope she wrote something because I really want to answer her. She didn't. Okay. Tell Christine that she can write to you at your email, or she can write to me and I'll forward it to you, or ask somebody else who's in during the week.
Okay. All right. So Christine didn't post her question, so we're going to wrap it up for the day. Christine, if you're still here, post your, you can either email your question to me at Shea M, that's SHEAM at westonnurseries.com. And that goes for everyone on this workshop. If you have any questions about houseplants, then you feel free to send me an email. If you have questions about vegetable gardening or cut flower gardening too, I have a farm, so feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy to answer questions on those topics for you. You can also send an email to Melissa at Melissa F at westonnurseries.com. Any questions about Weston Nurseries, you can send her a message and she'll get back to you. So I hope everyone found this lecture useful. As always, if you have any suggestions of other workshop ideas, we're always happy to hear them. So if there's something you want to learn about, let us know and we'll make it happen. And I hope everyone has a good afternoon. Happy Sunday.